What's up, Wildside besties and baddies? I'm Bailey.
And I'm Chelsea, and we're here to walk you through the wild sides.
From homicides to hosticides and everything in between.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride. Guess who's back?
Oh, back again.
Are y'all ready for some satanic panic cult stuff?
Y'all, it's twisty like a pretzel.
Twisty like a pretzel. That is it. So we are going to kick off this part 2 to this wild Fall River cult murders.
Yes.
Has this not been the craziest journey?
It really has. It really has. So we pretty much ended with Robin is convicted of second-degree murder, and she has like 30 plus years with the opportunity for parole.
Mm-hmm.
Carl Drew is like pretty much life in prison.
Yep.
For the murder of Karen.
Yep.
And then Andy Maltese is essentially going to have like life in prison with no parole for the murder of Barb. Mm-hmm. Nobody is going to be pegged with Doreen's murder.
Correct.
And I think that's all, right? That's kind of where we left off.
Yeah, kind of in a nutshell. And so the second half of this case, or of this episode, is kind of the twist, the plot twist version.
Okay.
And so we're going to get into more of the dynamics, the legal dynamics, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
All right. Let's do it.
Bum, bum, ba-da.
So the last leg of the episode. Okay, this is where all the twists and turns come in. In 1985, just a few years after the trials and convictions, as in a wild turn of events, Robin Murphy recanted her testimony and has maintained her innocence ever since. According to Audrey Cooney at the Herald News, after spending more than 20 years in prison, Robin Murphy was released on parole in 2004 and was released to a long-term rehab facility. That was short-lived. She returned to prison in 2011 after allegedly violating her parole because she failed to report a relationship she had with another felon. During this time, Robin Murphy again shared with the parole board that the testimony she gave in both Carl Drew and Andy Maltese's trials were fabricated. She made it all up.
What in the wrinkle of time is going on around here?
Oh. Robin told the Massachusetts Parole Board in March of 2012 that she, quote, concocted a story regarding the murder of Karen Marsden, the third victim. She expounded on this by telling the parole board that during the arrest, interrogation, conviction process, she, quote, concocted a story on how she was killed, adding, when we got the story together, I stuck with it.
When we got the story together? Who's we?
I'm getting there.
Were you proud of me for picking
up
on
that? I am. I'm really excited about that. So Robin was eligible again for parole in 2017 and was denied, arguably due to her publicly recanting of her original testimony 4 years prior and her previous parole violation. So the parole board's like, we can't believe anything that you say at this point.
I mean, at this point, sorry, babe.
The board acknowledged that Murphy had, up to that point, taken advantage of the available work, education, treatment programming, blah, blah, blah. She had a positive record in prison, but they also recognized that she wasn't consistent.
Right.
Fair to say.
Yes.
I mean, they understand that she was only 17 when this stuff happened, when she was arrested and charged.
Mm-hmm.
But they also had concerns about her codependency issues and reoffending and that kind of thing. So she was once again denied parole.
Right.
In the same turn of events, one of the original Fall River detectives, Paul Carey, so he was one of the main detectives in this whole case, he continued to dig into the Fall River cult murders after retiring from the Fall River Police Department. And he did so because up until his death in 2019, Paul Carey believed that Carl Drew was innocent in connection with Marsden's murder.
Grr.
And this is one of Fall River PD's own investigators, one of the three men who were over this case.
Right.
This was his belief, but it was not shared with his fellow investigators, Detective Sylvia and Detective Joaquin. So Paul Carey began investigating this case due to his statements that he really wasn't able to do while he was on the force. So he felt like he could only really investigate this after he retired.
Oh, yeah. Kind of like once the barriers of like you can only do this while you are under the badge type of thing, he felt like he had a little bit more freedom once he
Yeah.
retired.
Yes. Apparently, the investigative authorities and major players, including the prosecuting DA over the case, all believed Drew was guilty, period, end of story. From the jump.
Yeah.
Paul Carey went on to share his belief that Robin Murphy was really the ringleader and it was not Carl Drew. Who was the main ringleader in the trials?
It was Robin.
Her testimony, right?
Yeah, Robin was everywhere. And Robin miraculously knew all sorts of information. And Robin also miraculously got immunity before she started blah, blah, blabbing.
Yep. Paul Carey went on to share his belief that Robin Murphy was the ringleader, as I said, and that Doreen Levesque was murdered because Murphy was also in love with her and became jealous when Levesque started seeing Drew. So there's love triangles all over the place.
Wow.
Further, Paul Carey believed that Murphy and Marsden were present when Levesque was killed and that Robin Murphy killed Barbara Raposa because Raposa was in love with Andy Maltese. So Robin was a jealous woman, and if they didn't love her, she would kill her.
Which kind of goes back to that very, very first statement that you had about the victims, like their faces being bashed in. And typically when you see that, that means that there's some like deep connection. This is an emotional crime, a crime of passion, if you will.
Right. And Paul Carey goes on to say that he believes that Robin killed Karen because she was witness to those other two and she was the weak link. So does this give a new meaning to a tangled web? So going with his beliefs, Paul Carey, along with private investigator Chris Hayes, began to reinvestigate the bizarre and totally convoluted case that is the Fall River cult murders. They spent years tracking down the original individuals in this case to include the witnesses in the three trials. And do you know what? They found them. It took years for them to track down three witnesses who testified: Carol Fletcher, Leah Johnson, and Sonny Sparta.
Right.
So as a reminder, Carol, the first one we talked about, she gave testimony against Carl Drew that she was there for Karen Marston's murder but did not participate.
Yes.
Leah Johnson, the former girlfriend of Carl Drew, gave testimony that she was given a ring after Karen's death and it belonged to Karen.
Correct. And the grandma verified that it was actually the ring.
And Sonny Sparta had got on the stand but did not testify.
Right. She pled the fifth.
Right. What Paul Carey and Chris Hayes found when they finally found these individuals is that all of them admitted to perjury. They lied on the stand during the trials. What they eventually confessed to Carey and Hayes is that they were threatened and coerced by Fall River police to give the testimony that they gave.
Because they really needed to wrap this case up. And they really needed it to fit the narrative of the sensationalized satanic panic.
Yeah.
Earl Drew.
Son of Satan, all of it.
Son of Satan, all of it.
Yep. Carol and Leah both gave sworn statements and signed affidavits when they met with Paul Carey and Chris Hayes. stating that they had lied during the trials and that they do not believe Carl Drew to be guilty of the deaths of Karen Marsden or Doreen Levesque for that matter. With this new information at hand, Carl Drew and his attorney motioned for a new trial with this new evidence to include the sworn affidavits from Fletcher, Sparta, and Johnson, the three women.
And all three said the same thing, correct?
Yes.
This was years later. There's no reason to keep, some
Right.
secret, like we've all got to stay together in this thing. I mean,
Right.
this is over and done with, water under a bridge, yet they all have the same thing to say,
Yeah.
that they were coerced into lying on the stand.
As a matter of fact, Paul Carey, what he found, him and Chris Hayes, they uncovered a lot of damning accusations against the Fall River PD regarding threats, coercion, and blackmail. In 2003, Carl Drew and his attorney filed for a new trial with the new affidavits, as I said. In the affidavit filed with Drew's motion for a new trial, Carol Fletcher testified in the evidentiary hearing, which is the hearing for a judge to hear witness to determine if he's going to grant a new trial. She testified that she was threatened into testifying falsely by prosecutors and Murphy. So she was threatened by Robin Murphy and prosecutors.
Yeah, and I was going to ask if Robin was also kind of behind the scenes saying, like, putting heat on her.
And Robin Murphy wasn't supposed to get that much jail time. Like, they kind of had assured her that she would do, X amount of years and get out on parole, but she was in there for 20 years before she got parole.
Is this going to be attached to Dr. A's interview at all?
So
I was just about to say, because Dr. A was saying, like, a lot of times police will give promises that they have no legal right. Like, they can't give those types of guarantees. Like, they
Right.
have no weight, no pull
Right.
on what your sentencing will be.
Yep. So Carol Fletcher added that the actual murder scene was not in the woods at all, as it had been stated in the trials, but rather it was at the Harbor Terrace Apartments, which is where Sonny Sparta's apartment was, and this is where a lot of these people in the circle hung out. Carol added that there was an argument on the roof of Harbor Terrace and stated Robin and Karen were fighting, and she saw Robin put the knife toward Karen before she ran away from the scene. That's what Carol ended up testifying in this evidentiary hearing. Carl Drew was nowhere to be found in her testimony. She continued to share as part of her affidavit in 2003 that on February 9th, 1980, the day after Karen Marston's murder, she overheard Robin Murphy telling Carl Davis, this other dude, quote, she still had Karen's hair under her fingernails. So she overheard Karen telling this dude that she still had Karen's hair under her fingernails when she killed her. Carol continued in her testimony that Robin had come to her home and said that people would be asking her questions and was instructed by Robin to tell them that Carl Drew and Carl Davis had killed Karen. Robin was evil and possessive, according to Fletcher, and that her original testimony was shaped by Murphy and later by former district attorney David Waxler, who prosecuted Carl Drew's case. So she's saying that Robin Murphy and the former DA Waxler bullied her into giving her original testimony. According to an article by Greg M. Milliotte, DA Waxler has been accused by at least 3 former trial witnesses of coercing and threatening them into lying on the witness stand.
Oh, snap.
Prior to the original trial in 1981, Carol, this witness, reportedly had fled to Washington State because Robin had been threatening her, but Massachusetts State Police, along with Waxler, this DA, ended up visiting her and interviewing her on 3 separate occasions before Drew's trial. Carol Fletcher further testified that, quote, Waxler told me that if I didn't cooperate and testify against Drew, I'd basically be put in prison. They wanted me to lie about Carl Drew being present in Westport in the forest.
See, and I wonder if it's one of those things where they just really wanted Carl to take the fall for something, right? Like they were maybe tired of dealing with him, or, they just wanted to get him on something. And they were like, hey, this is a great opportunity to get him on something.
Yeah. So what's even more damning was the testimony given by Maureen Sunny Sparta at the same evidentiary hearing in 2003. So remember, she evoked her Fifth Amendment.
Right.
She came back to this new evidentiary hearing, and then she did testify there.
Okay.
During her testimony, she claimed that prosecutorial misconduct and coercion against District Attorney David Waxler, maintaining that Waxler had threatened to charge her with murder if she testified on Drew's behalf. Why else would a witness get on the stand in defense of somebody and then plead the fifth and not defend them?
Right.
Here, she acknowledged the reason she did not testify at Drew's initial trial in 1981 as a defense witness was because of the alleged threats made by Waxler. She said that she was to be a defense witness testifying in Drew's favor, but in a meeting in 1980 with former District Attorney Ronald Pena, his staff, Robin Murphy, she was called into the meeting reportedly because Robin Murphy would only confess if Sonny were present. In this meeting, Robin told the prosecutors and police investigators that she and Drew murdered Karen Marsden, but after the apparent confession was complete, Sonny said that former DA Pena came back to the room to speak with Sonny alone. She was quoted as saying, "Pena asked me which one of my girlfriends I wanted to keep, Robin or Carol. I said to him, this is all fixed, you're all crooked. Why would you ask me when Robin just confessed? Let the judge decide." So Sonny Sparta went on to tell the court in this evidentiary hearing that Pena told her that he was trying to do her a favor by asking her to choose between two friends. And she told the court that Waxler essentially said, if you testify on behalf of Carl Drew, you can take his place and be a murder defendant.
Oh, like we'll come after you instead of Carl Drew.
She said that she had told Waxler she was going to tell the truth, but his face got really red and he started screaming, saying, "You're not going to say anything to help him."
Mm-hmm.
Sonny Sparta also told the court that Waxler threatened to grant Davis a plea bargain for the Marsden murder, and Davis would do anything he wanted, including saying that Sparta was present at the murder. Now, the third witness, Leah Johnson, what did she have to say at this evidentiary hearing? Come to find out, Leah Johnson had lied about the ring she identified as Karen Marsden's in the original trial of Carl Drew.
What?
This is what she testified again at the evidentiary hearing. And to add credibility to her story now at that time, to top it off, there was also an affidavit from 1984 from Leah Johnson's friend, a woman named Lisa Cody, that in this sworn statement of Lisa, she was told by Leah Johnson, that Leah was told by the prosecution that they had 8 years on her and she would have to do that time unless she testified and said what they wanted her to say about the ring.
Tell me why ain't nothing but I just need to know why. Tell me why are all these cops making them say stuff they don't want to say on trial? I want an explanation.
So your explanation is Leah lied about the ring being Karen's because she was being blackmailed by the prosecution.
What?
So what happened to this affidavit? Remember the affidavit from 1984 by
Yes.
her buddy Lisa?
Yes.
Well, Carl Drew's attorney at the time, Francis O'Boy, didn't think it was enough to warrant taking legal action. And so this affidavit has sat untouched and unused for 40 years.
I am fresh out of comments. Like, I feel that a song and dance is just as appropriate at this point in the game because it's all ridiculous. It's all
Isn't it?
ridiculous.
I just cannot. I cannot. I cannot. And like, so all three women were essentially threatened from their reports by prosecutors, police officer, investigators or what have you. And they used either custody of their children, they used potential crimes that they could get charged with. They used all these things that and held it over their head. And they're like, if you don't, if you're not a witness for the prosecution, then we're going to pull all these things on you and you're going to do all this hard time.
Yeah, it's dance, puppet, dance.
Yep. However, during this evidentiary hearing, the court pulled testimony from another attorney, Alvin Yuma, who was like David Waxler's right hand man, said he was with Waxler 24/7, so it was impossible for Waxler to have made those claims. And attorney Yuma testified that he had never heard Waxler made such a statements or threats.
Well, of course, because if they start digging into Waxler, they're going to dig into Yuma.
During this evidentiary hearing, they have these three women who are giving testimony of what really happened, that there was crooked shit going on. And this buddy of the former prosecuting attorney was like, I was with them all the time and he was an expert witness. So, like, what is the judge going to look at?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's going to look at the expert, the people who have status and upright standings.
Yeah, like influence
Yeah,
and these three witnesses were sex workers. Some
right,
had problems with drugs.
right.
They recanted their testimony. They're not seeing them as, women who were scared and threatened.
Right.
And finally, there was no good place to plug this in because this is the cherry on top of everything. But for a grand finale point, it had been identified that Carl Drew had an alibi for both Karen Marston and Doreen Lebeck's murders.
So, I mean, but is this like tucked away with that affidavit? They're just like, we have this alibi, but we're just going to file it away with the affidavit and we're just not going to use that either.
Well, he had this alibi from the original conviction, from the original trial.
Well,
But
yeah,
prosecutors just, yeah.
that's kind of what I mean, though. Like, yeah, we'll just tuck this alibi away. Like, we just have a little box of like, it's like the island of misfit toys where we're like, an alibi is going to go in here and an affidavit's going to go in here. And actually, we have DNA that like links someone else to the case, but we're not going to bring that up either. We're just going to tuck that in a box too. Like, there's no telling. Like,
Yeah.
what all do they have in this hidey hole of a box?
The night that Doreen Levesque was killed, now this is the craziest thing to me as far as like alibis and them not using it. And then the night that Levesque was killed, Carl was literally at a relative's wedding, and there is literally photographic evidence of him being at this wedding. And there are people there, like family and friends, that corroborated that he was there during the time of Doreen Lebeck's murder.
And this was in the 80s where you had to shake that Polaroid to get that image. Like, you can't digitally remaster these Polaroids.
No. And for Karen Marsden's murder, Carl Drew was drinking in a bar with several people who corroborated that. Like, pretty much half of Fall River who was in this bar with him were like, yeah, he was here this time that
they
that
probably have a receipt. They probably have a receipt from him. Like, they probably have his order somewhere. It's like the dude ordered a cheeseburger, fries, extra pickles, and a beer on tap, and paid $7.42 because, again, it was the 80s and everything was really cheap.
Yeah. And not to mention, Detective Sylvia from the original trial, he had claimed that he was with Karen Marsden up until midnight the night before she was reported missing, so February 8th, because she was helping police and they had dropped her off at a church, and that was the last time anybody saw her alive. And so I bring that up right now because Carl Drew, so during trial, Sylvia, like, he had documented his statement that he was with Karen Marsden during this time, but they're accusing Carl Drew of being responsible for this murder when he had an alibi.
And Sylvia
Yes.
was straight up with her.
Yes. So they're keeping evidence from trial.
Tell me why. I still need to. I need to
So
know why. I need people to tell me. I need people to just it's okay. Just tell me the truth. I need you all to tell me.
so the kind of going thought is Carl Drew had a really inexperienced attorney, and so he didn't really have appropriate legal representation.
Mm-hmm.
And there was also some potential influence by the prosecution over this defense attorney. You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like a pecking order.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So no evidence at all. 2 alibis for both the murders, one for which he was convicted of. So despite all of this new testimony, and mind you, no new evidence of Carl Drew's involvement in the murders whatsoever, after this evidentiary hearing, Judge John P. Connor Jr. denied the motion for a new trial.
Of course he did. Of course he did.
Rumors were he was having lunch with the former DA prosecutor, Anthony Pina. I think it's insane that a judge did not allow a new motion for a new trial with this new evidence saying that the star witness against Drew had recanted her testimony. So now the woman who Carl Drew was convicted because of eyewitness testimony.
Mm-hmm.
There was no physical evidence linking him.
Right.
And there's reports from these 3 women witnesses that there was coercion and threats and blackmail by legal entities. And this judge, who's buddy with one of the guys who was coercive, denied a new trial. And to drive this point home, being denied a new trial after A, Robin Murphy recanted,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
B, the 3 witnesses admitted to perjury and admitted that there was coercion and they
Right.
lied about Carl Drew's involvement.
Right.
And 3, the fact that Carl Drew had an alibi. Didn't matter. His request for a trial was denied, as I said. And so y'all are probably thinking like, what the hell is going on in this crazy shit showcase? And this is where I'm going to bring in the documentary Fall River by James Buddy Day because it's powerful and it's investigative journalism at its finest. According to Mary Licio, and she is an executive vice president at Bloomhouse Television, she says Fall River does more than chronicle the sensational murders that beset this town, but gives a face and voice to the marginalized victims, women who, because they were sex workers, did not receive the care and attention warranted during the investigation into their deaths.
Mm-hmm.
Over the course of filming, we uncovered aspects of the investigation that were previously unknown, new evidence that 41 years later brings us closer to the truth of what really happened to these women. It was after watching this docuseries, as I had talked about a little bit before, that the jumbled pieces of this 10,000-piece puzzle really started to fit together in a way that made sense, because how it unfolded back in, 79 and the first few years of the 80s just didn't make any sense. It was a shit show. It was a media spectacle. Everything was about satanic panic, and it just didn't really fit.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that docuseries, the director and his team worked for years on investigating the case of the Fall River cult murders. This docuseries dives into the details of the murders, and what it did is it brought forth new evidence which ultimately paved the road for a legitimate possibility of what actually happened over 40 years ago to Doreen Levesque, Barbara Raposa, and Karen Marsden. In the 4th installment of this docuseries, they interviewed a man. And this man was an anonymous individual who came forward as an eyewitness, stating that he had information about one of the murders.
Okay.
He claims that he was 6 years old when this happened, and he was living at the Harbor Terrace Apartments, and he lived just a few doors down from Sunny Sparta. Do you remember, I think, the second part when we talked about the evidentiary hearing in Carol Fletcher and Sonny Sparta, and how Carol said that Karen Marston's murder didn't happen in the woods, it happened at the
Right.
terrace apartments?
Correct. Correct.
And so this anonymous individual said that when he was sick, he witnessed the murder of Karen Marston.
Ooh.
He said it took place on the top of the roof of Harbor Terrace. This anonymous male said he saw Carl Davis pulling a woman back, thinking it was Carl holding Robin, and she was aggressive towards Karen Marston. So, one thing to add here that I don't think I really touched on in the first part is that Carl Davis, so this,
Mhm.
remember earlier in the
He was
stories,
like the fourth. He was like the fourth wheel, right?
yes. So Carl Davis was also indicted for the murder of Karen Marsden, and he was that other person that was always mentioned in these stories.
Mm-hmm.
However, his case fell apart completely, and that's why he never stood trial for either one of them.
Mm-hmm.
A year after that, though, a year after the trial, he was arrested for assaulting Sonny with a deadly weapon. Apparently, he had beat her, and she, mind you, she was 3 months pregnant at this time, and stabbed her in the head with a knife because she had information implicating both him and Robin Murphy in Karen Marston's murder, which also absolved Carl Drew. So remember Carol Fletcher's testimony
Mm-hmm.
that it happened on the roof terrace.
Right.
This boy or this anonymous man, when he was 6 years old, is saying that in his memory, Carl Davis was there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so if he were, according to this eyewitness testimony, then he was a part of this murder. And Sunny, she ran in the circle. She and Carol were good friends. She must have known this.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this man who said he saw this interaction, which again, Carol Fletcher corroborated, which included Robin and Carl Davis. What are the odds?
Twisty like a pretzel. That's all I have to say. It's just twisty and salty like a pretzel, like a bad pretzel, like when they burn the bottom a little
Yeah.
bit too
And
much
like
of the
mustard
pretzel.
can't even fix it.
When it has that real bittery, gross, burnt taste on the bottom of it.
Yeah,
It's
that's
not.
what this case is.
I don't like it. I
Yeah.
don't like it at all.
I know that eyewitness testimonies and accounts can be sketchy, but this again corroborates what Carol Fletcher ended up testifying at that evidentiary hearing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When the director interviewed Robin Murphy in prison, so in this documentary, he interviews both Robin Murphy and Carl Drew. When he interviewed Robin Murphy in prison, he brought this up about the whole eyewitness of the 6-year-old seeing what went down on the roof of Harbor Terrace. She just deflects it and just says that, what can you trust about the eyewitness of a 6-year-old little boy?
Right.
She claims that she can't remember hardly anything that happened that long ago, but somehow in the same breath, she's able to remember the name of the woman that she'd buy weed from at Harbor Terrace.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
But she says that's all she can remember. Robin still sticks to the story that she last saw Karen on February 8th, which was the day Karen was murdered, after seeing her earlier in the evening and then parting ways as Robin went to Sunny's house. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so she's still saying, I saw her the day she died. We went our separate ways after we hung out with Sunny. That's the last I was involved in it. However, this docuseries ultimately makes a compelling argument that there was one more monster responsible for this reign of terror. Do you want to guess on who they're claiming in this docuseries is probably the real perpetrator?
I mean, I feel like the only person left to guess is Sunny.
Andy Maltese.
Oh, yeah. I kind of forget about Andy a little bit. Well, he was the prophet. He had the prophetic dream and
Yeah.
uh-huh.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So first, both Doreen Levesque and Barbara Raposa were tied. Their hands were tied and their legs were tied with white fishing line. Right? During the search of his car back in the early part of the investigations, police found in a brown paper bag, they found some things in what they referred to as the sex bag.
Ooh, I remember you telling me the first time I remember hearing about this concept, and you were just kind of like, have you ever heard of a grab bag? Did you refer to it as a grab bag?
A fun bag? A bag of
Fun
fun?
bag? Something like that. And I just remember that kind of being the first time that I had heard that there are individuals who will sometimes keep a bag packed in their car, kind of for a quick grab, like it's easily accessible, easily accessed. But that
So perpetrators oftentimes will have a bag where they have whatever it is that they need to follow through with whatever they're trying to do. That's not good, right?
right.
And do you want to guess what was in Andy Maltese's sex bag?
I'm hoping that you're going to tell me white fishing line.
White fishing line, along with other items like a rubber penis. Andy was the one who initially suggested to police that Carl Drew was Doreen Levesque's killer.
That's right.
Second, Barbara and Doreen's murders were a few miles apart. They were about 6 miles apart.
Mm-hmm.
And Andy Maltese lived literally smack dab in the middle of those two places. What the documentary uncovers in their investigation is that Andy Maltese had a criminal history prior to the murders and similar components in his criminal history to the murders.
As far as what?
So he had a history of rape and assault prior to these 3 women's murders.
Mm-hmm.
Come to find out, Andy Maltese would pick up girls, not women, girls from high school, take them to Fall River Forest, tie them up, and brutally rape them.
Mm-hmm.
He would also viciously sodomize them with objects.
Ooh, and that was absolutely present in the Doreen case. I don't know if you talked about it in the Barbara case, but I know for sure it was there in the Doreen case.
Yep. One of his assault victims also said that he sodomized her, and guess what? Tied her hands and legs up with the same fishing line. Essentially, his connection to the Bedford Street and Harbor Terrace crowd can be summed up with him frequently preying on very young sex workers with no legal recourse at that time.
This is just like a shake my head moment where anywho, go ahead. I'm not going to talk about it yet.
Yeah. Fourth, I know we touched on this when we talked about his trial, but the Fall River Police Department believed that Maltese's guilt in the murder of Barbara Raposa. They believed he was guilty simply because what he had shared with them while acting as this cool informant, right? And he was able to provide too many details and informations about Barbara Raposa's murder.
Right.
And Andy Maltese knew all 3 victims. 2 of the victims were bound and bludgeoned in a manner that aligned with his kinky proclivities, and Karen's skull had a crush injury, which was the same as the other 2 murders. It is thought that Karen was likely killed in the same way as the other 2 victims, Barbara Raposa and Doreen Levesque.
Mm-hmm.
My thoughts on the motive for Doreen is simple. He is a sexual predator. She was out of town and was not thick in with this Bedford Street Harborview crowd.
Right. And she met kind of the age profile, if you will. She was 17, right?
Yep. And she was an opportunity for him to carry out all of his sick shit.
Right.
For Barbara, it was rumored that she was dating a new guy, and Andy killed her because he's a controlling, jealous, manipulative dude. The type of guy that leads the motto, if I can't have her, nobody can.
Well, and it also kind of makes me wonder, since Doreen happened first, I wonder if that kind of unlocked, because up until that point, I'm assuming that it had stopped at violent rape and sodomy, but I'm wondering if it finally tipped the bucket, if you will, when he murdered Doreen, and then he got a taste for it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, possibly. Yep. As for Karen, he had a motive to kill her if she was in fact a witness to Doreen's murder.
Uh-huh.
She may have been collateral damage to Maltese, someone whom he might have wanted to silence before she exposed him as Doreen's attacker. And finally, for this theory, if you will, this is, for me, a huge piece of tipping me one way or the other on the fence.
Mm-hmm.
Records show that investigators initially thought that Andy was in jail for Karen's murder, which is why they precluded him as a suspect. But come to find out, Andy's lawyer had arranged for bail on February 8th, 1980. So he bailed out of jail hours prior to Karen Marsden's murder.
Oh, snap. I'm sorry. I just feel like that's beyond coincidental.
Now, how does Robin Murphy tie into all of this? We're not getting out of the thick of the complexity yet. We're getting there, but this is still kind of in it. We discover that Robin Murphy had also been a rape victim of Andy Maltese. According to Audrey Cooney at the Herald News, Murphy was reported as stating that Maltese sexually abused her for years, starting when she was 11 years old, and she worried that he would do the same to other girls. So when given the opportunity, she fabricated a story that she was present at Barbara Raposa's murder implicating Andy Maltese. Murphy, now later on, she would go on to say that what she shared at the trial back in 1980 and her false testimony was essentially a, quote, suicide mission. Robin went on to say, "I don't care what happened to me," acknowledging the severe trauma she had endured in her life. And so at that time, when she was 17, she had no guidance. She was living on her own. She was caught in the middle of this crazy web. She didn't really care what she said or who she accused.
Right, right.
She also made a statement, I think it was in the documentary, that it was something along the lines of, "It worked with Carl Drew, so I knew I could say what I needed to say to get Andy Maltese locked up." As far as Karen Marsden, arguably the link in all three of these pieces, Karen was also a victim of Andy Maltese's sexual monstrous acts. The going theory is that Karen Marsden was likely at the scene of Doreen Levesque's murder, forced to be there by Andy Maltese, so she was a witness.
So he could maybe have like a thumb on her, kind of like, don't say anything.
Yeah.
Because I can do, like, you saw what I did to her, and I can
And
do
Karen was terrified, right?
that. Right.
She was, this whole process, all the reports is that she was just absolutely terrified all the time. And then Karen was murdered. The day Andy got out of prison, she was murdered the day he got released out of jail. Who would be a better scapegoat than the pimp Carl Drew that had a scary reputation?
Right. Yeah. Now, Andy Maltese,
He died in prison. Yeah, I forgot what year it was, but he passed away, I think, in like the 90s or the early 2000s.
Oh, so, and did he ever give statements, or was it just always singing, "I'm not guilty"? Do you know?
I mean, he never said that he killed them, other than this dream of seeing his girlfriend killed. But there are many victims of Andy Maltese. There was one individual who was interviewed in the Fall River docuseries, and she explained how violent he was and how twisted he was and how there's no question in her mind that he is actually the perpetrator for these murders.
Yeah.
The last piece to say is, isn't it just a coinky dink that Robin Murphy was told by two separate people about two separate murders? What are the odds of that? Robin Murphy has been regarded as having a very high IQ. She's very intelligent and she's very street smart.
I was going to say, I mean, I literally was thinking, I was like, this girl is probably off the charts. Like, to be able to not only be that quick on like putting together a story keeping a story, but then also knowing like how, like, kind of the end game, right? Like she could see the big picture of this thing.
Mhm. Yeah. And one thing I forgot to mention with the whole Andy Maltese and Karen, it was reported that he had threatened Karen if
Mhm.
she went to police about what he had done.
Right. Well,
And
yeah.
then when he got out of prison, that was the same day that she was murdered.
Oh, and she had gone to the police.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
She had gone to the police. Oh,
Yeah. Robin Murphy, kind of going back to Robin Murphy being very intelligent, savvy,
man. Mhm.
street smart. She was smart enough to know, even at 17, that if she condemned Carl Drew and Andy Maltese and gave the legal players a story that fit their narrative,
Right.
which, remember, we're in the throes of this satanic panic.
Right.
It's a
Right.
very, and two, I know for sure one, but I think two of the three main investigators are very devoutly Catholic on this investigation, right?
Right.
And she threw out this: I was possessed by Satan. It was a satanic sex ring. And then they could very easily overlook potentially a 17-year-old girl is capable of committing murder. And, one thing that I wanted to add that I feel was important, wasn't really sure where to plug this in, but some people think that the Fall River cult was never really a cult and it never really existed.
Mm.
Some people think it was fabricated by police and the media to sensationalize the murders.
But again, why? But why?
Who knows? For lots of different reasons. But that may be valid. I personally don't really think much or get too caught up in the idea of this being the case. I also don't really, this is just my opinion, I also don't really think that there was like a quote unquote legitimate cult.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these, again, a lot of the things that I've heard when I've listened to it about this case, it's like, oh, they were this part of the satanic cult, they did rituals and blah, blah, blah. Personally, I think that Carl Drew created this as an extension of his control in the Fall River sex work arena.
Absolutely.
I think he used this to scare the girls or the women under his thumb to maintain control. That it was simply a fear and manipulation tactic to keep power and control within his grasp.
Well,
I don't think it was that deep, to be honest. Again, I don't think it was like this super hardcore cult. I think that
mm-hmm.
it's almost like method acting. And he was smart enough to know, like, Karen was terrified. All these people were terrified.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, they said Satan runs the street. How can you fight that?
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
really think that it was almost just I'm not saying it's right, but a kind of genius invention to maintain his pocket of power and control. But that's just my thought.
Well, I really can see that point and I can agree with that. But again, I think I'm gonna stand by, even though it's, hashtag relevant, not relevant. But I'm like, guys, that's kind of why you need to make better choices. Because seriously, you're gonna create this narrative, you're gonna create this, you know, um, persona, if you will. And then if you get caught up at the wrong place at the wrong time, or people think you're at the wrong place at the wrong time, you don't really have much to stand on. Because it sounds to me like if that was the case, it ended up backfiring.
Yeah.
So, do I think that an innocent man should be in jail for life for murdering somebody who he didn't murder? No, I don't think that. Do I wish people would make better decisions? Yeah, I do.
And I think everybody can agree that he didn't make good decisions.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't about him being a stand-up
Dude,
poster
I
boy,
know. I know.
right? This is simply about right and wrong,
Mm-hmm.
guilty, innocent,
No,
right?
I agree. I agree. But yeah,
So,
no, as the case stands, listening to the evidence, if I were a juror and I listened to this evidence, if this was the evidence presented to me, there's no way that I would be able to say I agree he's guilty. He's guilty of first degree murder. I couldn't do that
mm,
if it were just me. Like I said, with what I've heard from you, like from what I've heard, it would be interesting again to hear the testimonies and stuff like that. If they had like audio recordings of those, but there is reasonable doubt in my mind.
For sure.
There is reasonable doubt.
And I mean, he had an alibi. Damn. What else can you I don't know how else, you know what I mean?
So, yeah, well, I think the things that bother me the most, there are two things that bother me the most. Yes, I agree. The fact, that he straight up had photographic evidence of him not being there. Was that for Doreen's or was that for Karen's that he had that he was at
It
the
was Doreen's.
for Doreen's, which I know that she didn't even, her case didn't even ever get brought up. But again, too, what really bothers me about the Karen case is you don't have a body. I know that you have pieces of a skull. I get that. But again, like, we're hoping that these pieces of the skull match x-rays, which all I know is I've looked at a lot of x-rays throughout my career. I've looked at a lot of x-rays. And I'm just saying, it is very easy to have discrepancies with x-rays. I mean, literally like a 1%, like a 1 degree positioning or a turn of the x-ray, like the cone beam or the beam coming from the x-ray will give you a totally different picture, and it'll give you shadows and it'll give you all this stuff. So again, it just really bothers me that I'm like, y'all don't have a body
Or any evidence.
You don't have fingerprints, you don't have semen, you don't have blood, you don't have a murder weapon on this dude. And I just don't understand how a jury could be like, yep, no, 1,000% he did it. I'm blown. My mind is. Has anybody interviewed any of these jurors? Are we allowed to do this?
I have no idea. I honestly have no idea.
I need to know what happened in that room when they were all deliberating this case. How do you put a man in prison for life without parole with this?
You guys will hear me refer back to the West Memphis Three several times throughout this case. So it's like with Damien Eccles. He wore black clothing. He painted his fingernails black. He did like poetry around like death and stuff like that. I mean, he was interested in the occult, right? If you will. And there was literally not a single shred of evidence, and they convicted him for a life sentence. And again, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse with this whole thing. I'm really trying not to sound disrespectful towards any like institutions or belief systems. But I imagine that most of the individuals on the jury, from a statistic standpoint, and we're pulling jurors from a pool, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the jurors, most of the population is Roman Catholic. And then this is a son of Satan, devil worshiping dude that all these people are saying did it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know what I mean?
I know. And I guess like we have a tendency to kind of transition into a, real life application thing with this, but with all of our cases. But I just can't help but think, like when I am mentoring at the high school and when I'm mentoring at the junior high, where I'm like, guys, you need to be mindful of your reputation. And people are just like, I don't care what people think about me. And part of me, I'm like, I love that you are sure in who you are and you're not swayed by other people's opinion. However, if you have set yourself up to, be the son of Satan, pimp, big dog on the streets, not that it's excusable. We shouldn't judge people for their, what they say or how they act. But again, it's kind of one of those, like, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, and do ducks talk? We don't know. And it poops like a duck. It's probably a duck. So you might want to be mindful of the things that you do, because if you have a shred of evidence, then yeah, it's probably going to be like, hey, look, this is our dude. This is our guy. And they can't see past what they want to see.
And that's valid. And I 1000% understand where you're coming from. But in theory, and I know this is not, life is not theory. My head is not in the clouds about that.
Are we about to get into a fight? Are we going to have a fight?
No,
A podcast fight?
no, I'm just saying, like, that shouldn't matter in the eyes of the law, right? In court. That shouldn't matter
It shouldn't matter.
when it comes to guilty or not guilty.
Yeah.
What's also interesting in this documentary is they interview some locals, kind of who overlapped with a lot of these people.
Uh-huh.
And the consensus is Carl Drew wasn't a great guy, but everybody here is not stupid. We all know that he didn't actually kill those girls. I know that was a lot, but I wanted to end with this. According to Wire's article by Rosemary Rossi, Fall River director James Buddy Day said, "We went down to Fall River and went into her basement and took out these boxes of files and went to Kinko's to have them digitized." He said that there were also cassette tape interviews with witnesses among the papers.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "I just started going through all the stuff over a year, and it wasn't hard to see that Carl suffered an injustice, that he really didn't have anything to do with the murders." That came to light pretty early on. You could literally just go into Fall River Superior Court and read the trial transcripts, 11 volumes. No one reads those trial transcripts, no one who reads those trial transcripts will come away thinking Carl Drew was guilty despite what the jury said.
Right.
Maybe it's not that difficult to see that Carl didn't have much to do with these murders, but they'd opened the door to like what really happened. That was really kind of the journey that we wanted to go on, kind of drill down the truth and see how close we could get.
Mm-hmm.
Carl Drew is still fighting his tireless fight against the state of Massachusetts even 40 years later. He has appealed his case, and each time it was denied. He is officially out of appeals.
Oh, gosh.
The only thing that can be done now is if there is new evidence to his case, his innocence, and for it to be presented for reconsideration.
Mm-hmm.
Robin recanting her confession can be used as new evidence. What remains, however, is substantial concerns that a judge will take this new evidence seriously. This would implicate several heavy hitters or big players in that community that quite likely were guilty of coercion, threatening witnesses, and being part of a Reba McEntire song.
Right. Yeah. That's the night that the lights went out in Georgia. That's the night that they hung an innocent man.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
Are you so glad that I was able to?
I was hoping you were going to sing it. I put it in there for you.
Thank you. Don't trust your soul to no backwoods southern lawyer.
Yeah.
Because the judge in the town got bloodstains on his hand.
Yeah. Why else would... We'll get there. Okay. The other things that we, the public, can do is our research, right? Take an interest in this case, decide for yourselves. If you find that the evidence or lack thereof in Drew's case points towards a severe miscarriage of justice, then you need to use your voice.
Mm-hmm.
Sign petitions, send letters to the governor and the DA of Massachusetts. Do everything in your lone voice's power to point to the injustice of this case. And I want you guys to let us know what you think. Do you think Carl Drew is the Satan-worshiping sex cult leader and murderer that all those other podcasts and news reports over the years claim him to be? Or do you think this is a case of moral panic that was influenced by law enforcement's biases within a good old boy judicial system at the time? And the last thing I'll say is, this is absolutely not the last thing I'll say. I'll talk for quite a while after this. I don't know about y'all, but a man sitting in prison for life based solely on one person's testimony, eyewitness testimony, which has been totally recanted without having any physical forensic evidence tying him to the murder just does not sit well with me. I'm not convinced. What do y'all think?
So I was actually talking with some friends last night about this, and we were just kind of talking about how weird this whole process, this whole podcasting process has been. And the hardest part about it has been trying to wrap our brains around the fact that everything that we thought we knew has started to kind of unravel because of like false confessions and unconscious bias. Like we just, we were just talking about how crazy all of these elements are when they start being on your radar. And then also like how social media or just media in general, not like before the times of even social media, but how media in general really like plays such an active role in crime. And I don't think we give enough credit to the power of persuasion, if you will, from the media. So I think all of that to say, I think that's why some of these cases, like this case, it needs to be like these long thought about, poured into cases because, you can't unknow stuff. Like you can't be exposed to what we've been exposed to from talking to different experts,
Right.
and continue looking at crime in the same way that we did before we gained that knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So, what's so interesting about this case for me, and listeners who don't know me, personally, like family or close friends, Chelsea's the only person who could vouch for me on this. I am not one to change my mind easily.
No. Nope.
When I kind of bite into something, I'm kind of like a bulldog.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of evidence and data to get me to change my mind. There's no emotional persuasion that's going to get me to do it.
Correct. Whereas I will change my mind 40 times before I decide on something. And even at that, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I'm open-minded. You could change my mind. But no, you were like, absolutely not. This is the hill. And I'm living
and I'm
here.
going to die on it. And when I chose this case, I'm going to be really totally honest. It wasn't this hidden agenda of, talking about the Innocence Files or the Innocence Project or false convictions. Like it was not that deep. It was, that's a catchy name. I wonder what goes into that. And then it was about the satanic cult. And I was like, this shit's crazy. And so I was like, yeah, this is cool. This is, a wild side case. And then I started to do it and I did my homework. I watched the documentary, I watched interviews, and it took me about, I think by page 2, I was like, this is cap, dude. And I reached out to Carl Drew. I haven't heard anything back. I reached out to the director, haven't heard anything back. And I might not hear anything back.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to talk to Carl Drew and get his perspective on it.
Yeah.
And I'm still open to that. If they, reach out in 6 months, we can always kind of do a follow up to this case. But even in the documentary, he says like, yep, I was kind of an asshole. Like I was a dick to the cops. I was a thug. I was, I wasn't a great guy. And he was like, but I didn't kill the girls. And he was like, that's fine if you want to like lock me up for being a dirtbag, but don't convict me of something that I didn't do because you have a crooked system and you need a fall guy.
Yes. Because I feel like that really is the bottom line is what are we going to agree on? And what if we do believe in having on a personal stance, like if we believe in having a moral system and a moral compass, does agreeing that this guy was a jerk is that enough to turn a blind eye to a faulty judicial system? You know what I mean? Like, to me, it's not. To me, it's like, hey, should this guy be in prison? Probably. He probably would have messed up and ended up in prison. But should he be in prison for something he did not do? I don't know. I don't believe that that's okay.
Yeah. And I have been trying to get in touch with the Innocence Project because that's one of my goals, is to have them come on.
Wow.
And y'all can bet your bottom dollar that if I get a voice, if I get in front of anybody at the Innocence Project, I am going to bring this case up, because it's not up to me to determine whether he's guilty or not, right?
Right.
It
Right.
is up for me to use this platform to advocate for somebody who was convicted solely on a 17-year-old eyewitness, or, confession or testimony or whatever you want to call it, with literally no other physical evidence connecting him to any of the murders.
Right. Well, and I think it kind of goes back, Bailey, what you said a couple of episodes ago, where it's like, if it's a signature today, what's it going to be tomorrow? If we have suspicion that there is a corrupt aspect or proponent of our American legal system or judicial system, what's it going to be tomorrow? Right? Like, what are we going to allow to slide? And how far are we going to allow that to slide?
And my thing is, to all of the people involved in this case up in, Fall River, Massachusetts, if there's nothing crooked in the system, then let's show it, right?
Right. Yeah.
Let's pick the scabs.
Sure.
Let's do some exploration. And
Sure.
if there's no coercion, excellent.
Perfect.
If there is coercion, I don't think the whole country is going to turn against you. I think people are going to say, that was fucked up, guys. Let's do better. Let's get justice for the people who need to get justice. And we're going to keep it rolling.
Yeah. And hey, and if we find out that, we are completely wrong, we're the jerks in the thing, pointing fingers where
Cool,
they should
I'll take it.
I'll take it. Yeah, exactly. But again, what if we're not? As the show that we used to watch when the kids were really little, the Wildcrats, what if? What if?
And,
And if it were your uncle, your kid, if it were your person, wouldn't you want justice for them?
Yeah. And I have my opinions. I have very strong opinions about this case. I know I've probably alluded to it, but what's really interesting and convincing is literally every person that has dug into this case, and not just like read the article from 1980, that was done at the time, who's actually like dove into the details of this case, everybody walks away saying, nah, that's cap.
Yeah. And I think that in itself creates reasonable doubt. And again, yeah, I don't think it's ever too late. Maybe it doesn't change anything for Carl, but hopefully it will bring awareness and make a change for somebody in the future. There's got to be some redemption in that.
I think he's got an attorney in there working on, I don't know the legal, language for that, but they are working on it. And I don't know the details of it right now. He's got a page. He's got a kind of free Carl Drew page, if you will. I'm going to link it in the show notes. You guys can explore it, look at it all you want. But I don't think that we should just stand by and be like, oh, that really sucks, and then keep moving if we can at least spark a conversation about it. So let us know. Let us know on Facebook. Let us know on Instagram. Send us emails.
Yeah.
What do y'all think? Do you think that Carl Drew is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? Or do you think that we've got the wrong guy and we don't really know for sure what happened? So that is it. We are so glad you guys joined us for this, and we are going to leave it there. And Chelsea, we hope to catch you
on the flip side.
Bye, guys.
Hey, Wildside Tribe. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Wildside Podcast.
Make sure to tune in on Wildside Wednesdays. New episodes will drop each Wednesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
We would love to hear from you, so if you have a wild case recommendation, email us at wildsidepodcast@gmail.com. That's wildside with a C. Or share your thoughts in the comments below.
As always, if you haven't heard it today, you're loved, you're worthy, and you're valuable. And we'll catch you on
The Flip Side.